Hi Noteboard Gamers and welcome back to Noteboard Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now in today's video we are going to be reviewing probably my most anticipated release of this year, and of course, as you can see from the box here and everything that's on the table, it is of course Voidfall by Nigel and David Turczi, and released by Mindclash Games. Now a few caveats to get out of the way before we kind of dive into the solo experience on Voidfall. First of all, this is a copy that was sent to me by Mindclash themselves. I previewed the game for the Kickstarter, and they sent me the Galactic box copy. There was no onus on me to review, but you know, you can take that with an element of bias as well. And also, I get on very well with David Turczi. In fact, David's taught me the game a number of times, or I played the game a number of times with David prior to receiving my copy. So when we come to talk about things like complexity, again, you need to take that into consideration there. So I just wanted to get those out of the way. So what is Voidfall? It is a 4X style space game taking place on this massive galactic scale over eons and decades, etc., where you, as a particular house, there are I think 14 houses to choose from, it's certainly in the solo game, you're going to explore the galaxy and you're going to battle against the Voidborn. I say battle, in reality, combat is not a massive part of this game, but it certainly probably plays more of or places more importance on it in the solo game than it does in the multiplayer game. Now the game is 1 to 4 players. It can be solo, it can be 2-player co-op, it can be 3 or 4 player competitive as well. I played it throughout various iterations in its kind of development journey at all player counts. So obviously I played it solo a large number of times, both in the physical form, in kind of not prototype but in early development forms on TTS, etc. I played it co-op on TTS, and I played multiplayer, 3 and 4 player multiplayer, competitive as well in physical forms in earlier copies of this. So I played it at all player counts, and it is this large, sprawling, complex game where you, as I say, in the solo game, you're going to be exploring the galaxies that's laid out in front of you and the various scenarios you can take, and trying to kind of extend your reach and your influence throughout this galaxy. You're going to be managing resources. There are cards that you use. Look, I'm not going to go into how the game plays because there are lots of great videos out there. First of all, well, the best place to look for videos for how to play Voidfall, both solo and multiplayer, is Paul Grogan's Gaming Rules channel. Paul did the official how to play video on this, and then Paul and I on Paul's channel did a solo playthrough. So I don't want to get into the rules because it's not going to be a rules teach, because the rules are heavy, and I'll come on to that in a second. But if you want to go and see how the game plays, then please go and check out Paul's channel, Gaming Rules, for the official how to play, and certainly have a look at my playthrough, my solo playthrough with Paul. Yeah, we together did a solo playthrough, and I think he's got a 3 or a 4 player game on there as well with the guys from I can't remember the name of the podcast. Whose role is it anyway? Whose dice is it anyway? So yeah, so that is Voidfall. Now I have the Galactic box edition. So this has got all the plastic miniatures, etc. The standard box comes with cardboard replacements, etc., and not dual layered boards. But you don't miss out on any gameplay if you've got the kind of standard edition. So the way I'm going to format this is kind of having a look at this from a solo perspective. I'm going to look kind of and see if I can help you decide whether the juice is worth the squeeze on this, because it's a big, bold and complex game. It requires a kind of a lot of input to start getting the best out of it. So I'm going to look at kind of 5 different aspects and give you kind of positives and potential negatives from them, and then do a bit of a wrap up at the end. So without much further ado, let's step into my first, the details on my phone here, my first point, and that is production quality and price. So when it comes to production quality, as I say, I've got the Galactic edition, and you know it's a Mindclash Games game, so you know that the production quality is going to be really high. And in the Galactic edition, you get lots of little kind of plastic miniatures Here we go. You get some dual-sided boards. I've got the metal tokens that act as the guilds and the various sector defences, etc. The kind of double-layered player boards that you slot things inside. There's some extra trays for putting cards on. So there is a fantastic production quality here when you look at what you get in the game. Now, if you've got the kind of the base game, you don't get all of those features. You get tokens instead of the ships. You get single-layered boards. You don't think you get the kind of dual-layered mats, and you certainly won't get the metal tokens. But you're not missing out on any gameplay whatsoever. So that's a really, really good thing, is the fact that, you know, all of the stuff that you can get in the Galactic Edition is purely aesthetic, and whether you go for that or not is completely down to your taste. I think you will have the ability to then buy the editions, etc., later on from the Mindclash store, but at the moment, obviously, they're just shipping the Kickstarter to people. And there's just so many things to like about it. The card art by Ian O'Toole and the iconography is absolutely fantastic. These dials that you get to track your resources and how much production you do are fantastic. And there's a little bit of maths that goes on there. You don't have to do anything, but kind of, you know, if you've got 3 guilds and it's going to give you this much, if you've got 4 guilds and it's going to give you this much, etc. And it's really, really good how it all works out. It feels like a very tactile game, and it has tremendous table presence when you lay it out on the table as well, and that's what I really like about it. Now, in the Galactic box, you also get game trays as well, and the game trays are really good in the most point. For the most, should I say. They're really good and effective way of storing your game and then getting the stuff out as and when you need to get it out to set the game up. So that's kind of the positive from that. But what is the kind of negative on the production quality? Well, I've talked about the game trays, and if you've got the Galactic Edition, you've got the game trays. And part of the game trays are these little trays that you get to store your various house cards in. So each of the asymmetrical kind of factions you can play are called houses, and you get to store them in these cards. When you're playing the solo game, you have to pull out 4 of these cards. And because of how they're stored, it's not that easy to do, because you're meant to pull 4 particular out that then have a broken glass symbol on there, so you can have 1, 2 or 3 broken glass symbols on there, and you shuffle them, and that is your fallen houses, and they go onto the board. But because of how those trays are, and you can see, those trays store absolutely everything in there. Some of them have additional cards that you use. They have their weapons cards. They have their agenda cards, etc. And therefore, you've got to kind of go through that. And it's a bit of, how can I put it, a bit of functionality in terms of storing the game at the expense of actually playing the game. And that can add to some frustration. Now, what I do is I just choose 4 random trays out and do it from there when I'm setting up, and then change over if I've got no broken glass symbols on them. But it can be a bit of a bind, and I know that that is something that a lot of people are kind of not so happy about, is how that is stored. Secondly, you know, it is when you look at the Galactic Edition, there's a lot of plastic here as well. There's additional trays for laying some cards out. Not all of it is, even though it's, you know, potentially aesthetically better, it's not necessarily needed. For example, your technologies and your agenda cards, they've got trays, which we can see here and here, in the Galactic Edition. And if you didn't have the Galactic Edition, you can just lay them out normally. So there is a bit of overkill, and you are paying more for that. And I think that's the key thing as well, is that I can't remember the exact pricing on the campaign, but I believe if you were to buy the base regular game in retail, or look for it in retail when it's released, it's going to be around about £90 to £100. And I've got a feeling that the Galactic box is around about £180. So you're paying almost double for a hell of a lot of plastic and a lot extra. Now, from a user interface experience, having the triple layered mats and the dual layered boards, the triple layered mats, the dual layered boards, it all kind of adds to that. Things aren't sliding around as much, but you're not missing out on any gameplay. So I think, you know, first of all, it's a fantastically well produced game. I think, you know, when you look at the Galactic box, you could say it's slightly overproduced in some cases, but then again, you wouldn't be buying that if you didn't want the stuff that's in there. Price-wise, for the base game, I think, given the new norm of board games, kind of £90 is there or thereabouts, but it's still it's a decent-sized investment for a lot of people. When we're used to paying £50 to £60 for our board games, suddenly you've got like an extra 30% to 40% that you're putting on there, and therefore that can be off-putting to some people. However, if you are going to buy the game, I would say do your research first. Understand which which version of the game you want, what extras you want to get, and watch a lot of videos and see if the game is right for you, because there are a number of things I'm going to discuss and that could absolutely preclude people from buying the game. It is a big and heavy and complex game, and those games are not for everybody. Right, just bear with me, I'll look down at my phone. So that was kind of point number one, for and against. Production quality and price. I love it. I'm in a different place, obviously. The game was sent to me by Mindclash, so it is a hefty investment for people. I think the production quality is outstanding, with a few niggles, like how the house cards are stored. So that is kind of point number one. Now we're going to move on to point number two, which is the rules and the complexity. Okay. You cannot get away from the fact that Voidfall is a big and complex game. It's possibly one of the most complex games that I own. Now, again, I'm coming at this from a slight position of advantage in the fact that I was taught the game by David and played the game with David a number of times. So therefore, when I got the game, I had a deeper understanding of how the game played. I still went through the tutorial scenario though, because there have been some changes since I played the game. And of course, with a big complex game like this, if you haven't played it for a few months, then what happens is you tend to forget the rules. Look, do your research. The rules are big on this game. For example, you get a compendium which has got your scenarios and some lore in there and kind of how to set up the game. You get a rule book which takes you through kind of all the rules, all of the various functions and things that happen in the game, and that is some 38 pages long. And I'll come on to how good it is in a second. You also get a glossary which takes you through every card and every item in the game, tells you exactly how they work. But again, you have a 51 page glossary on all the various cards, etc. There's loads of cards, loads of different things that may need a level of explanation. Finally, there's an icon sheet. Now, the artwork is fantastic. It's by Ian O'Toole, but there is a 4-page kind of glossary on our icon reference sheet, if you like, and that is not going to be for everybody. Now, the more you play the game, of course, the more familiar you become with the icons. I look at this increasingly less and less, hardly ever now when I'm playing a game, because I understand the icons on the board. But for your first few games, you will be referencing this 4-player sheet. Right, so let's talk about the positive about the rules. It's got a tutorial. It walks you through kind of how to play the game, and it kind of it takes you through in such a way that you learn by doing and potentially making mistakes and doing suboptimal moves. It takes you through the first cycle. So the game takes place over 3 cycles, and each cycle has a variant number of turns you can take in that cycle. It takes you through the first cycle, then it asks you to go and read the rules so you can play the next cycle, and etc. etc. So the rules are set out in a fantastic way, but do not think that it's an easy game to play, because it's not. A game that has this much depth, this much kind of thought process and decisions space behind it, it means it's not an easy game to play. You will always find the answers to what you're looking for in mainly in these 2 books, the glossary and the rule book, and sometimes on the reference sheet and in the compendium. And it's it's great that they put that amount of effort into, meaning that there are no unanswered questions so far. Everything that I've kind of had to look up, I've been able to find, and that's really, really good. And I enjoy reading rule books. So, your proclivity to kind of how much you're going to enjoy this game to start off with is going to come down to how much you enjoy absorbing and reading rules. I found the layout exceptionally good. I know some people have struggled a little bit with the tutorial, the fact it asks you to play a bit and go off and play another game, and go off, read it, should I say, and then come back and play another part of the game. But I found the rules fantastically well laid out. It's one of the best references I've seen in a game in terms of the glossary, the icon reference sheet, the index that's in there, all helps you find it. but it is a complex game, and that comes down to why the game may not be for you is the level of complexity. I think it's around about a 4.8, something like that on BGG. I don't put massive amount of kind of importance on BGG rankings, but it's pretty much on the money for this, in the fact that it is a massive complex game with lots and lots of moving parts. Now, I would say that if you're looking at Voidfall, again, you need to do your research on this. It has never shied away from being a complex game. It has never shied away, it's had rule books online, etc. It's never shied away from the fact that there is a lot going on in this game. It's never shied away from the fact that you are going to have to absorb and process a lot of information. But that is not for everybody. This is not necessarily a game for casual gamers. And if you're more of a casual gamer, then I would steer clear of Voidfall, because this requires a deeper element of commitment to get the most out of it. It's going to require multiple plays, certainly from solo perspective, and if you're playing with others, it's probably going to require multiple plays from a similar or the same group of people. It's going to be very hard to teach this game to newbies. The teach is going to take about an hour or so. There's going to be loads of questions coming up. The gameplay for a 3-player or 4-player game, playing their first game, if nobody's aware of the rules and hasn't played it before, is probably going to stretch into kind of 3-4 hours or something like that, and that is going to be too much for people. Now, I want to go back to the point and saying it's not going to be for everybody, but Mindclash has never shied away from the fact that this is a heavy game, but it's really heavy games with lots of decision space, lots of decisions to think about, lots of processing to do, loads of information on there that's out there for you to process, then it's not going to be for you. You can look at the iconography, and as I say, there are a lot of icons. They all make sense after the first couple of games, but you've got to be in the mind that you are going to have to really commit some time to learning this. And not everybody is in that mind space. Not everybody has that kind of inner need to really digest a lot of rules. So that could be really off-putting for a lot of people. The complexity is there. Every move you make, from the first card you play to the last card you play, there are numerous options that you have. You see, you're going to generally have kind of 9 cards. First round's probably going to be 8 cards, but then you're generally going to have 9 cards. Each of these 9 cards has 3 actions on there, and most turns you can take 2 of those actions. It's a game that absolutely demands that you think about forward planning and strategy, even from a solo perspective, because in the solo perspective, what you've got the unknown of the Voidborn that are coming out for you, and therefore you don't know exactly what they're going to do, and they're kind of growing in strength-ish, kind of, or diminishing your strength, should I say, as the game progresses. So, you've got 9 cards, each with 3 actions on there. So you've got, on your first go on each round, you've got 27 possibilities to choose from. And once you've used that card, you don't get it again for the rest of that cycle as well, in the main. You don't get it again for the rest of that cycle. Now, there are things that will help you, and we'll come on to them in a second. We have the heroic focus cards, but just knowing that at the start of a round you've got 27 decision points, 27 things to think about, can be a lot to process for people as well. So the complexity for the style of game that it is absolutely hits the nail on the head for somebody like me who likes big and complex games. But that's not everybody. And it's not a casual purchase. I really want to kind of stress that. Voidfall is a game that you will have to research before you buy. If you've got any doubts about it whatsoever, maybe try it on TTS, try somebody else's copy, because if it is big, it is complex, and it can get slightly overwhelming. So that is kind of point number 2. That was rules and complexity. Now we're going to move on to point number 3, which is the solo AI. Okay, solo AI. I have a feeling that more people will end up playing this solo than possibly multiplayer. The reason being is the solo AI works so well. It has relatively little overhead, but it affects you each and every turn that you have. You see, how it works is you have a crisis board down here and a number of cards that have kind of a ranging number of things on there. So we have these cards, and you're going to create a deck of these cards that have got 1, 2, and 3 on there, and also a war on there as well. And what's going to happen is you're going to craft a deck so that you can then, which is this here, you can then shuffle that, which will have a number of those cards in there from each of those stacks. And then you pull one out, and that's going to give you the crisis for there. So there we go, we've got number 2. We have these decks, which are increasing difficulty crisis cards, so 1, 2, and 3. So that was number 2. This would be my crisis for this particular turn if I was to do it. And this says to get rid of this crisis, I would have to take all three actions on one of my cards. There are ways of doing that. Remember, you're generally only going to take 2 actions. There are ways of taking 3 actions. That would get rid of that crisis. If I don't get rid of that crisis, that goes onto my crisis board. Now, there's 2 layers to your crisis board. There's a top layer, which is, I think, war, combat, if you like, and that adds to the difficulty of what's going to be a skirmish when the Voidborn come and attack you. And the bottom one, which I think is economy, kind of takes resources from you as well. And you get to either resolve those crises, or they go onto your board, which can make it very, very difficult for you. The higher that gets up, the more chance you have of putting a catastrophe token on there. And catastrophe tokens, if you put all 3 on and need to put another one on, that's it, game over. And also, or it might be just when you put the 3rd one on there, and they also kind of counter points against you at the end of the game. So that's going to happen every turn, and that's going to kind of mess up, but there's not massive overheads there. It's just another thing to think about. However, at the end of each sector, or cycle, if you like, so cycle 1, you're going to resolve the skirmish board, basically, and the crisis board, and that's going to mean there's a skirmish. And what happens there is the Voidborn is going to come and attack you and try and take over one of your sectors if it can. So that's the skirmish there. The AI overhead, we'll talk about the combat in a second, is relatively low in terms of the additional rules that you've got to learn. Yes, you have to do some slightly different setups when changes to setup when you set the game up. It's relatively kind of a low complexity rate to learn if you know how to play the game. But if you're playing the game and you're putting it in for the first time, it's just another layer of complexity on there. But it works so well, and you feel this kind of increasing threat as they feels like they're working against you. They're heavily defending what they've got, but they're also, at the end of each cycle, or if a war card is drawn out, they're going to try and skirmish you and attack you. There are various levels of complexity as well. So you have kind of medium, normal, medium, and hard, etc. And they've got these cards. I think this is for the normal setup here, or easy, maybe easy, normal, and hard. It tells you kind of what their starting score is for the end. So they're going to get 60 plus however they score at the end. Then how many cards of these 1, 2s, and 3s and war cards go into your draw pile for each round, and that's really good. And there are a number of those cards, and you adjust the cards accordingly for that. Once you've got that down, it works surprisingly well. What you want is, from a game like this, it would have been very difficult with a really complex game to go down a really massively complex solo AI that had lots of decision trees. Fortunately, the decision trees are relatively minimal. We're talking about which sectors they're going to invade. And that's it. So it works really, really well, because you're concentrating on trying to kind of do your 4X type elements on the board. You're exploring, you're expanding, you're exploiting, and exterminating. Not all in full, but yeah. But you're trying to build your resources and expand your empire, close rifts, etc. So you don't want, while you're making all these kind of 27 potential moves at the beginning of a game, at the beginning of the cycle, you don't want to have to think about that, then have to think about 1,500 things that the AI can do. So it works massively well and increases the amount of threat on there. I think what David has done alongside with Nigel here is is create a solo mode which suits the game massively. I'm a big believer that solo modes should be designed for the game. I think there are some complex games out there with easy solo modes because they just work, and there are complex games out there with complex solo modes which don't need to be that complex, or easy games with complex solo modes that work because the easy game with a basic solo mode with a non-complex solo mode doesn't work. So I'm a big believer that, I know a lot of people like low overhead in their solo AIs. I'm a big believer in the fact that the game should have the solo mode it deserves. They've absolutely nailed it here in terms of how that solo mode's going to work. How that solo mode works and how it plays as a solo player. And as I say, I'm going to go back to the fact I think this game is possibly going to be played more solo than it is multiplayer, because the setup for solo just works so very, very well. So that's kind of the solo AI from a positive perspective, but why might it not work from a negative perspective? Well, it's difficult, you see, because I think, given the game itself, it's nigh on perfect. I think we can hark back to kind of how you set the solo mode up when you're picking out the fourfold and houses, etc., and the use of these trays to try and do that, which is, there must have been a better way. It's done for convenience of storage, not for convenience of play. So kind of the setup, it can be a bit kind of egregious, if you like. But, once you get a system in place, it's not as bad as some people would have you think. But I will come back to the fact that, initially, if you've just got this game for solo, not only are you absorbing all of this information about how the game plays, how you play, what you can do, how your particular faction works, because each faction is asymmetrical, you've also got to think about then working out how the AI works, how the Voidborn work as well. And when it comes down to things like combat, you're probably going to get it wrong at first, because combat is purely deterministic, okay? You will know before going into a battle whether you're going to win or not, but there's lots of little levers that you have to pull on that to determine that. Now, they have just launched an app for it. Let me see if I can find the app. I haven't got it. They have just launched an app for combat, which makes it a lot easier. But certainly from a solo perspective, it's, because you've got nobody to bounce it off, whether you got it right or wrong, chances are, when the early games, you might make a few mistakes on that deterministic combat. There's no luck in it whatsoever. And that happens more frequently possibly in the solo game and the co-op game, because you have, as I say, at the end of each cycle, or if a war card comes out, you have a skirmish. So the Voidborn are going to try and take over one of your sectors. So I think combat happens more in the solo game than it does in the multiplayer game, potentially. So you're going to have these skirmishes where the Voidborn come out and they're going to try and take over your sector. Getting that flow, and there is a nice, I think it's on page 33 of the rulebook, there is a pretty in-depth kind of discussion on how skirmish works, and then on page 35 you've got the entire combat sequence. But as you can see, I've talked about the rules being big and complex. It's literally a full side of steps, etc., that you have to go through to understand combat. Once you've done it a few times, you will get it, but that deterministic element of it really takes it in another kind of dimension for you. The AI gets stronger depending on how much corruption you have on your board, so that can increase the AI skirmish strength, if you like, which means that your decisions that you make when it comes towards when you're thinking about not just your first go each cycle, but also understanding that at the end of that there's possibly going to be a skirmish, and how do I then defend my sectors against that skirmish? It's a lot to juggle there. The AI just continues to go and go, but again, just coming back to it, if absorbing complex games isn't your jam, then absorbing complex games with a solo mode that you've got to think about not only how it works but how it affects you in the game as well, yeah, it could be a lot for people who don't like that kind of stuff. For me, it really hits the nail on the head. I found the overhead quite minimal now. I can breeze through kind of the end of cycle, the end of turn solo AI part of it, where you're advancing the Voidborn, and the end of cycle turn as well, where you're doing skirmishes and you're resetting your decks, etc. I can breeze through all that now, but it makes for a really chunky challenge. So the solo mode for me absolutely hits the nail on the head, but it is an additional layer of complexity that won't work for some people. Okay, so that's kind of point number, I think 3 that was. 1, 2, 3, yeah. Now we're going to talk about the table presence and the setup. Okay, table presence and setup, and oh my god, This is one of the best looking games that I've got. As you can see from the picture, you set it up on the table, and again, bear in mind this is a Galactic box version, so it has the plastic stuff, etc. You set it up, and I haven't had anybody that's come into the room where I've been playing this and not gone, wow, what is that? That looks amazing. It has a fantastic table presence. It's absolutely glorious from the way that the sector tiles are set out, the artwork from Ian O'Toole. You can, and you saw from the picture, starting to work on kind of minimizing my setup and my my space now, so I can get it all on a kind of 3x3, 3 foot by 3 foot play map. Still, you know, still a fairly big amount of space, but it absolutely looks fantastic. Now, setup, the book walks you through kind of how to set the game up, and you know, once you've done it a couple of times, you will know what to do. You won't have to refer back to the book. You'll understand each and every stage that you have to go through to set it up. I can set it up now. Admittedly, I played the game probably a dozen times now, and I can set it up without referring to the book now, which is great, but initially obviously you're going to refer to the book. So I think it looks absolutely fantastic on the table, and as I say, the setup, once you get to grips with it, it absolutely works. One of the best looking games I own. Everything feels on point, and for a Euro game, and bear in mind this is at heart a Euro game, no getting away from that. It's a Euro game with a space theme, and because of that, you know, there's not beiges on there. There's lots of nice colours and lots of great artwork by Ian O'Toole. Looks absolutely fantastic. It looks fantastic on the table, but that comes at two costs. Is you saw from the picture, I've got my solo set up on this table here, and it's taken up a fair chunk. This takes up a lot of table real estate. You cannot shy away from that. I could effectively on this, because of the size of my table, I could play 4 people with this in the center here. But as a solo gamer, you can need more or less all of the space that you would need in a multiplayer game, bar where you're going to put a couple of player mats for the solo game. It takes a lot of space. And I think also the reason this version pops for me is because of the plastic miniatures as well. If you've got the base version, or the retail version if you like, the plastic miniatures are replaced by cardboard tokens, so it doesn't quite pop as much, but doesn't affect gameplay. And it depends whether you're looking for functionality or aesthetics from it, basically. But yeah, it does take up a lot of gameplay. So that's one of the caveats about having a great table presence. Sorry, takes up a lot of table space. About having a great table presence is that because it's so imposing, it's bloody big as well. And if you've only got a small table to play, then chances are you won't be able to fit this on there. The other thing is the setup. Now, as I say, I can set it up without referring to the book. I look at the scenarios, draw my factions, set all the tiles up, etc., without referring to the setup guide in the book. Probably still takes me about 45 minutes to set it up. That's somebody who knows how to play the game and knows how to set it up. The setup on this is an absolute bear. And I think when you're playing for the first time, once you've spent 2 hours unboxing and sorting everything, when you're playing for the first time, going through that book, setting everything up, it's going to take you more than an hour to do that for your first game. And at that point, you've got to worry, am I really going to kind of get the most out of this? I'm not in the headspace to do it. And I get that. I absolutely get that. It depends on kind of how much interest you have in the game itself. I would possibly recommend setting it up one night and then playing it the next night, just to give yourself a bit of time. You understand the stuff on the board, but your first few times it's probably going to take you an hour or so to set this game up, and that's a long time to invest. Tearing it down, obviously less than that because you're chucking things in boxes, but it's still a reasonable investment. This comes down to now, when we look at it, is kind of you have the deep rules teach, you have the long setup, the relatively long teardown, and a long gameplay. All of these things, you know, if you're thinking these aren't for you, then you know you've got to think that Voidfall may not be for you. Maybe play somebody else's copy, let them do the setup. Maybe play it on Tabletop Simulator. I don't really use Tabletop Simulator other than for previews. I just much prefer the time I get to spend it up. You see, for me, setting up a game is part of the ritual. It's part of me switching off, forgetting my job, forgetting everything else around me. Spending an hour setting up a game for me, or 45 minutes setting up a game for me, is not lost time, but but I can absolutely see why it is for some people. It's a bear, it's a beast, it's not a nightmare to set up, but it's fiddly and it's complex, and you've got to make sure it's right, and you're checking the scenario to make sure everything's set right, and you know, the storage system with the house cards doesn't really help as well. So there's lots to think about getting this game to the table: the space, the size, the setup time, the teardown time. If all of those are major considerations for you, then it's not going to be a game for you, because this is not a game that you go into lightly. It's expensive, it's complex, and if you're put off, nothing wrong with being put off, but if you're put off by having to devote quite a bit of time into setting it up and tearing it down and making sure everything's correct, then Voidfall is not going to be a game for you. For me, part of the ritual. I love to see it start to spread out. I'm starting to get the kind of the layout right for me as a solo gamer, but that's not going to be for everybody. So on the whole, looks fantastic, just really pops off the table, screams quality. Absolutely, you know, everybody's in awe of what they see when they come into the room. It shows the level of complexity in the game. Absolutely love everything about it, including setting up, but that's not going to be for everybody. So that is kind of setup and teardown. Right, now onto the fifth point, and we'll talk about your decision making in the game. Okay, now the final point for and against Voidfall, and that is your decision making. This is the amount of choices you have each and every turn, each and every cycle, each and every game. Let's talk about the houses first. There are 14 different asymmetrical houses, and they all do play very, very differently as well. There are some more basic or less complex ones, and some more complex ones that have potentially additional cards that you're going to put in here. For example, the faction I'm playing at the moment is House Yarvek, and they've replaced their innovation card with a raid card. This means that they are good at doing surprise attacks, basically. So you have the houses to think about. So, you know, you're going to get more out of this game as you play around with these various houses. Find out which houses work for you best in your play style. Find out which houses work with which scenario the best. Not every house is going to be optimal for both your play style and for the scenarios that you play as well. So you have the houses. Each one comes with 2 starting agendas. You get to choose which starting agenda you get, which also details which is your first technology as well, and that's these cards here, which kind of your upgrades, if you like, to your ship, etc. So there's choices right at the beginning of the game in terms of the house you want to play, and also the starting agenda that you want to go out. But that's not the only thing as well. Is you also have the choice on the solo game of what difficulty you're going to go in at as well. So you know that's another choice there as well. Then it comes down to choosing the fallen houses. These are the other technologies that are going on the board and on the board, and also potentially the fallen house that you've got to kind of potentially overcome on the map itself. Now, the game tells you how to do this, and you can do it kind of one of 2 ways. You kind of randomly choose 4 that must have at least 1 broken glass symbol and maximum of 3 broken glass symbol on their card, which we maybe not be able to see with House Cheveus. I don't know if you can see that on there. It's got a broken glass symbol. Oops, it's got a broken glass symbol on there. You can choose that randomly, or you can kind of draft, if you like, not draft, but you can choose which ones you want to play at. And again, each one will change how the game plays, because those have specific technologies which go onto the technology board, which dictate kind of how you can upgrade your ship throughout the game. So all that is in the setup, the number of choices that you get to make in the setup. Then it comes down to playing the game itself. And as I mentioned, most of the game, apart from the first cycle, you're going to have 9 cards. Each card has 3 actions on there, which means, as I say, at the beginning of each cycle, you've got at least 27 potential actions you can take. I say at least because in the solo game, what you also get are these heroic focus cards. Okay, so you're going to put 3 of those out each cycle. If you don't use them, then you don't use them. Each of those has got stronger actions than the cards here. So you say, right, I'm going to use, I don't know, my heroic development. Here we go. So I use my development card, but I decide to use the heroic one. It's got stronger stuff on there, but it costs you more. So now you've got to think about, okay, am I willing to get rid of resources to have a stronger hand, or do I need to use my basic card? You get your 27 actions at the beginning of each of each cycle. And of course, whichever action you take first, you're not just thinking about that, but you're thinking about what action you want to take next and next and next, because each cycle can have a variant number of turns on there, determined by the cycle card that you're going to pull out. So many things to think about purely before you play your first card. Then you're looking at the position on the board. You're thinking about what's going to happen with the skirmishers. Is it a war card that's come out for a crisis? Do I have to manage this crisis? Can I go for this sector? What do I have to do to go for that sector? If I move from one sector to another, does it leave this sector exposed? And therefore, at the end, when the skirmish comes, am I going to get overdone? And all the time, you're trying to relay that back into these cards here. Now, I love this, because this is like a huge dynamic puzzle for me. It's absolutely fantastic. It tests me in ways that I could never think about at all. I can generally do the first cycle in about, I don't know, about 20, 30 minutes, something like that. 20 minutes, 30 minutes maximum, probably around about 20 minutes, because there's less happening on there. But then we get into cycles 2 and 3, where things start to become more and more kind of complex in terms of what you're trying to achieve, because that's when you at that point you're really starting to think about your scoring. Not only do you get scoring from the sector cards, you also get scoring from your agenda cards as well, and a couple of other places, but you're trying to think about your scoring, because ultimately you're trying to beat the Voidborn score. Whew, yeah, so you then get all this wonderful decision space, and I absolutely love it. I feel like a genius when I plan something 3 turns ahead and I manage to pull it off. Similarly, I feel like such a schmuck when I've gone a particular direction, it gets to the last card in the cycle, and you think, right, I really need to do, oh, I don't have the ability to do that because I played that card earlier. And none of my heroic cards that have come out have given me that kind of, given me what I need to do from that. So you can go from feeling like a genius to feeling like a schmuck very, very quickly in this game. But if you like complex games with lots of decision making, then this is really going to hit the nail on the head for you, because it doesn't feel like, yes, you take suboptimal actions, but I don't feel like I'm wasting actions. Yes, I've lost games where I know I could have done better had I played cards in a different sequence, etc. Some of the decision making as well is not taken out of your hands, so to speak, but because the combat, and I say combat, is deterministic, the decision that you make is, do I have enough resources to go into that combat? Now, it's a Euro game, and combat here is pretty much treated like, I don't know, do I have 3 sheep and 4 wood to trade for 2 bales of hay, right? It's just another Euro type function. But because it's deterministic, it feels like, it feels like you're placing it on a different pedestal, and it's not really. In essence, you're just looking at your resources. Do you have enough resources to do what I want to do, which is take over this sector? As I say, combat, when you first start playing it, can feel a little bit overwhelming. It's not, and certainly the use of the app that's now been launched makes it a lot easier from that. But it is a decision that you have to make along with everything else, or you're building up to that. It's great if you like having loads and loads of abilities, loads and loads of choices, trying to make that optimal move to go there, thinking about what the AI is going to do, how the crisis board is going to affect you, what's going to happen on a skirmish, what's going to happen on a war, and you like kind of crunching all that. It's fantastic. And from a solo perspective, it's really good because you're not rushed by anybody. You're absolutely not rushed by anybody. If you've got the time, you can just think about that decision and work out those possibilities. Nobody's got the time to play it all day, every day. And you don't have to play, as a solo gamer, you don't have to play in one session. I've done this over many nights sometimes, maybe played 45 minutes at a time, gone away, thought about it, come back the next night, done my moves, etc., and work things out that way. And that fits the style of the game. You see, the game itself, the timing of the game is not meant to be all instantaneous. These battles, these fleets that you have, you're not controlling individual ships, these are fleets of ships you're controlling. And the battles and the movement takes place over decades. So therefore, if you want to go away and think about it for 45 minutes, in reality, in the space of the game, that feels like the right thing to do as well. So there is lots of decisions. You never feel trapped, but you feel suboptimal, but you never feel trapped. There's something you can do which may not be optimal for now, but will set you up for your next kind of event that you want to do. So if you like all that kind of stuff, fantastic. However, if you get overwhelmed by choices, then again, Voidfall is not going to be for you. This is a game about looking at those choices, filtering those choices, looking for that optimal route, not just for now, but for later. And that can be overwhelming for a lot of people. As mentioned, casual gamers before, I would hate to think that there's casual gamers out there who are going to go out and buy a copy of Voidfall, because I think a lot of people would potentially find it quite overwhelming. And that is the other thing as well. You know, if you're playing it and you've got the rules down, and you've processed everything else, and you're playing it, as I say, you can feel like some kind of genius. In the early days when you're playing it, you feel more like a schmuck, because you are the suboptimal decisions. You're constantly checking rules. You're constantly doing everything that you can do. You're constantly referencing the rule books as well, because, you know, if I do this, what does that mean? Yada, yada, yada. And you're constantly referencing this icon sheet as well in the early games, because your decisions are based on the icons that are on the board, on your cards, on the various cards on the board, etc. And processing that can be a hell of a lot of work, and it is a lot of work. But if you kind of like complex problems, then that will be less of an issue for you. If you don't, and you know, you don't want to have that kind of level of mental exertion that this game demands, not just requires, but it demands of you, then again, Voidfall is not going to be for you. I have no problem with people who, you know, there's nothing wrong with anybody that doesn't like complex games. There are certain complex games I don't like. This, for me personally, hits the nail on the head in terms of the level of complexity that I like. But for people who really shy away from, you know, want to play a game for fun and not feel like a maths test, then it's not going to be for you. I'm not saying it does feel like a maths test for me, but for some people it would just be massively, massively overwhelming. However, going back to my point, I love it. I love everything about the decision making. I love the fact that my actions now have an effect 3, 4, 5 turns down the line, as well as sometimes an immediate effect as well. I love having a wealth of choices and kind of working the puzzle out in my head, and it really hits that on the. It really kind of nails that for me. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, so you must do some research and have an understanding of whether complex games are for you. It doesn't shy away from being a complex game. It doesn't shy away from having loads and loads of decisions to make. But yeah, it really does. And if you like that kind of stuff, it's fantastic. Okay then, my final thoughts on Voidfall from a solo perspective, bearing in mind the caveats I said at the beginning of the video. It's with no trepidation whatsoever that so far this is Game of the Year for me, for my taste, from what I've seen through development, and from the dozen or so games I've played of it now. It's absolutely Game of the Year for me. I cannot stop thinking about getting this game back on the table and having to devote all the time for it. Everything from the ground up is just been developed in such a way that makes solo and multiplayer, but I'm only talking about solo, makes solo such a joyous puzzle to play. It's this wonderful dynamic puzzle that you're kind of working through every step of the way. Now the game itself is derived, it's a spiritual successor to Nigel Buckle's earlier game, I think called Amiga Centauri. So this is kind of a spiritual successor for this, and you know, this is, you know, I mean, David's name is on here. This is a Nigel Buckle game, and David has come in and then helped Nigel then kind of shape it into the game that it is. It's a masterpiece for somebody like me. You know, from the moment you set it up, from reading the rules, which I think are fantastically well set out, no matter how many books you have to go through, they're still very, very well set out. I haven't found any unanswerable questions. From setting it up, gawping at it on the table and looking at its table presence, playing those games, you always feel that slight bit of trepidation as you're choosing which house you want to be. and your first move, what am I going to do? What this house's strength? What is this house's strength? And what do I need to do first? Do I need to get more fleet out there? Do I need to think about upgrading my ship? Do I need to think about going and exploring straight away and taking over sectors? It's fantastic because right from the get-go, you're making decisions that will affect the end of the game for you. Things like managing your corruption. This corruption is a bugger. It's an absolute beast because that affects your scoring. You'll have corrupted sectors. You'll have corrupted parts of your player board, of your kind of your tracks on your player board, etc. That massively affects your scoring. This is a scoring game. Okay. Yes, you can lose by having too much catastrophe on there, but it is a scoring game. And therefore, you've got, the first cycle, you're probably going to not score massively, but by the second cycle, you kind of know where your score needs to be. By third cycle, at the end of the third cycle, you really start to see your engine that you're building up really start to deliver those points there. And therefore, corruption, when it's on certain things, reduces your scoring ability. So managing that corruption is absolutely key. The harbingers that are there, so that I think they're used in the co-op game as well, and maybe in the multiplayer game, and they work differently in the multiplayer game. But in the solo game, they effectively kind of affect the crisis track and push things further up the crisis track. You're always going to put them on the left of the crisis track, or the first left space available on the crisis track. That means cards are going to get pushed up the crisis track, which means the AI's skirmish ability is going to be stronger, or you're going to have to pay more resources. If you can't pay resources, you have to lose other stuff, and yada yada yada. And yeah, so everything that you think about there is just, it's just nailed it perfectly from a solo perspective. It seems like it's funneled to a solo perspective, but I have played it multiplayer. And I've enjoyed every game I've played of this multiplayer as well. So there's a lot to think about here in this game. You get a sense of scale. You get a sense of progression. You get a sense of grandeur by playing the game itself. And as I say, once you understand those core concepts of how the game works, then you can start to play it relatively quickly. A solo game is still going to probably take you about 2 hours, maybe longer depending on the scenario. I think I could do one of the first scenarios in about 90 minutes, but generally it's going to take you a couple of hours, so you have to devote that amount of time to it. But when you're playing it and you've got your first few games under your belt, you'll start to feel very, very good as you understand the flow and the mechanisms and how the cards work, and how you can use one card to then feed into another card, to feed into a third card, maybe a fourth card, etc. You start to feel those connected dots and those dots connecting for you. But it's a game that demands your time, both in learning, in setup, in playing, and in tearing down. And not everybody has that amount of time to give. I know some people out there don't see that solo gaming is worth it. They'd rather play a video game, horrible kind of false equivalency, and they don't want to spend an hour of their time setting a game up. And I get that, absolutely get that. I make a special point of clearing stuff in my life so I can set it out and play the game the way that I want to play the game and devote that time for it, because it's not time wasted for me. It's time well spent because I enjoy the ritual of putting it up and seeing everything grow and choosing my factions, which is all part of the game for me itself. So yeah, in terms of we covered the production quality, absolutely fantastic. Apart from a few niggles with things like the house trays, etc., you do not need the Galactic Edition. Absolutely, you do not need it. You're not missing out on any gameplay whatsoever. From an aesthetics perspective, I won't never play with it, of course, but from an aesthetics perspective, it looks absolutely fantastic. It's a Euro game. You cannot get away from the fact it is a Euro game based in space. Now, the book itself, the compendium, has a massive amount of lore in there in terms of what's happening, the houses, what's happened, how the Voidborn came to be, etc. And that's all great to read that. I read through that when I first got the game. But it's hard. It's a Euro game set in space, and you can strip it down to what is essentially a mechanical Euro game, and that's it. Certainly with combat being so deterministic, there's no dice roll, there's no chance in this game at all. The only dice that are on the board are there to signify the population of each sector. So you're not rolling die. Everything is deterministic in this game. There's no element of chance post setup, because you're chancing your setup depending on the variant ability. And the crisis cards that come out, but that's not really chance. That's just what's coming out. That's just drawing from a stack of cards. It's probability, I suppose, rather than chance. So there's no chance here. So it's massively deterministic. It's a Euro game set in space. It's not Eclipse, okay? It's not what's the other one? Beyond the Sun. All right, it's very much its own thing. I think, you know, if you look at two games, I could liken it more to. It's weird to say, but it gives me Mage Knight feels. Right, I know you're not uncovering sectors as you move out there, but you are exploring this hex-based sector using cards to kind of maximize what you can do and how you can do things. So it does have a slight Mage Knight element against it. I'm not saying it's totally comparable to Mage Knight. I think it's probably closer to a game like Scythe, which Scythe and this, yes, they've got, you know, hexagon-based games, etc. But combat is not the main focus of them. You're going to combat more in the solo game because you've got the skirmishes that happen against you. But combat is not the core element. It's more about kind of pushing and seeing where you can go and moving out there and exploring and advancing, etc. So it has those kind of feels to it. But I will say, the AI in Voidfall is a lot less complex than the AI in Scythe. I know that can cause a lot of people to really, really scratch their heads. Now, David and Nigel have come up with ways to make the solo AI work with, as I say, no overhead, but as little overhead as it needs to have, and it works very, very smoothly. You get the additional bonuses, or boons, should I say, of having these heroic focus cards work for you as well, which gives you just a few more options to choose on your turn. So absolutely nails what it needs to do on the head for me. I say slight level of bias from me, and I have played it a number of times. My teach in the almost before I got my own copy, it was always done by David Turczi, so I always had that kind of yes, and this happens because X, Y, and Z. So I understand that I have a better level of grasp of how the game plays than a lot of people or most people, and so take that with an element of bias as well. We come down to then why it doesn't work or why it might not be for you. Well, we talked about kind of the storage on the Galactic box, all the wonderful game trays. You've got that awful system with those house trays. I've found my own workaround for it, but it doesn't help with kind of setting up the game. You have the setup of the game itself. It's long, it's fiddly, it's, you know, you're constantly checking stuff. It is just, you know, it's going to be way too much for some people. You have the fact that you have all these rules as well that you have to learn. Feels overwhelming, and I think some of the early reviews that I've seen on this, generally from people who played it a couple of times and are still overwhelmed by those rules. The more you play it, the less overwhelmed you become, and I find I'm barely checking the rules now. I may check the glossary just to find out, just to confirm what a few cards do, but the rules and the iconography work for me very bloody smoothly now as well. From a solo perspective, and if I was to drop into a game with other people, absolutely I would do that. But that rules overhead is big, and if it feels daunting, if you think you're only going to play it a couple of times, then you know that is not going to cut it for you. But you know, give it time. The level of decision making, we come back to that. The 14 different houses that you've got, each one plays differently, and again, I don't think you can give it a fair assessment unless you played with a number of the houses. Basic gameplay doesn't change, but how you play the game changes based on the strengths and the relative strengths and abilities of the houses that you choose. Now, I've played with about 6-7 of the 14 now, so about 50% of the way through that. Currently playing with Yarvek, which is one of the more complex but not too complex houses, and I love it. I absolutely love it. But I think, again, some people are potentially being put off a little bit by playing with one faction, or if they played multiplayer, just factions that felt like somebody was overpowering. And that's coming down to two things. Maybe those factions don't work together too well. I can't see that being the case, because I think Mindclash and David and Nigel would have worked hard to apply balance on all of those. But it's more down to understanding how the game works and what you can do. So that comes down then to how much time you've got to put into this game. Is the juice worth the squeeze on this game? And this is where it's completely subjective. For me, absolutely. I don't regret a single second, a minute, an hour I spent on learning, setting up, playing and putting away Voidfall. Every time I play it, I have a massively epic experience, because for a Euro game, it feels as thematic as it could do. It is still a mechanical game, but it feels as thematic as it could do. I get a sense of vastness and grandeur in space. So for me, absolutely. Just the production quality, the rules, how it guides you through everything, the level of detail that's gone into it, the level of balance that's gone into it, means that everything absolutely works for me. So if you like a big, complex game, and it is complex, with which is going to take up a lot of table space and is going to take up a lot of your time to both learn, play, and appreciate, and you need to play it a large number of times to really get to grips with how the mechanisms work, then Voidfall is for you. If you're put off by having to invest 2 hours unboxing it, putting it away if you've got the Galactic version, you're going to have to invest a good few hours into learning the rules. And then you're going to have to invest an hour in putting it up. And then I invest 2 hours, maybe more, in your first game in playing it. And that's going to be extended by the fact that you're going to have to reference these rules, and you're going to have to reference those icons. And if you then have got all that to do, and you've then got to think about the 27 potential decisions you can make at the start of each sector and how they interact not only with the crisis board, with the solo AI, with your faction house, with the technologies that are available, it can get overwhelming. And if that's in any way, off-putting to you, then I would say that Voidfall is not going to be for you. It's for me, absolutely 100% no trepidation in saying game of the year. Something really special is going to have to come out of the woodwork this year to knock this off game of the year for me, because it speaks to me on a very, very good level. Now, you could say, all right, well, I don't need all this. I'll go and play it on TTS, basically. I'll save myself 200 quid and play it on TTS. That's great, fantastic. You know what? You want to go and do that and see if the game's for you, that's even better. TTS isn't this for me. I know it's not the same for everybody. TTS isn't this. TTS isn't me kind of sitting there absorbing the puzzle, sitting at my table, thinking about everything that's in front of me, picking cards up, reading individual cards, moving the stuff around on the board. That's not TTS. TTS doesn't do that for me. TTS has its place. If you want to go off and experience in TTS, make sure you read the rules, etc., and do it that way, then absolutely fine. For me, it's an event. Voidfall is an event for me, one that I'm more than happy to partake in as many times I want to, because I don't feel like I've wasted any time in this game. It has its niggles. It's not going to be for everybody. It's complex, deep, deterministic, lots of rules, lots of icons, a bugger to set up, long time to play, a bugger to tear down. And I love it because of all those things. They're all things that make the end experience worth it for me. So from my perspective, 100% the juice is worth the squeeze. I can totally get that a mechanical feeling game that takes a lot of time, very complex, is not going to be for everybody. So make sure you do your research. Make sure you want to invest the time and the money in the game. And as I say, it is, without a shadow of a doubt, game of the year for me. I don't think it's going to be top this year. So, thank you very much for joining me on this journey through Voidfall from Mindclash Games, designed by Nigel Buckle and David Turczi. Thank you to Mindclash for sending me the Galactic box. Take that. Everything I've said, I've tried to be as fair as possible and look at it from both perspectives, but take it that there is an element of bias in this video. Utterly adore this game. It's going to be a game that stays with me forever. It's never leaving my collection, I can say that now. And I know it's a game I'm going to play multiple times each year when I've got the time for it. So, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out our other videos. And one final thought. If you can't find anyone else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Until next time, bye-bye.